Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the second story from chapter 41 from the Road to Latin textbook called De Exercitibus Romanis II. Now we're continuing the same sort of narrative, talking about the Roman army, its structure, who is in it, the legions, the cavalry, right? It's still continuing that story, but it'll give you another bit of practice on the grammar for this chapter, which is good, right? On sort of a familiar theme. Now before you dive too far into it, like I always tell you, if you want to see the story in more detail or get any of the notes, vocab, whatever, check out my website. You'll find everything there. You can also see the story in a different way if you want to look at the cases highlighted feature I use. It might let you might help to let you see, where the subject is, direct object, all those things. But regardless of what you do, before you dive into this, you want to make sure that you've got the vocab under control. I know this is the second story from chapter 41, so you should feel pretty good about it at this point. But if not, make sure you know the vocab, just because you won't be able to really understand what's going on otherwise. And always read this story aloud, right? I tell you in all the videos, but if you can find a classmate to read it to, that way you're working on your speaking, your pronunciation, then have them read it back to you so you can work on your listening skills. This is a great way to make sure that you're using all the different parts of your brain to understand Latin and you're not just translating in your head. Okay. The other bit of advice I always tell you is use the read and reread method. You've heard me say it a million times before, but read the story, write down any problem areas you have. Then when you're done with your first read, go to your list of problem areas and try to figure out where you went wrong, right? If it's vocab, that's pretty easy. Just look the word up and you'll be fine. If it's grammar, try to see if it's something from this chapter, right? It might be something about this particular chapter's grammar that's throwing you off. Look it up. If you can't figure it out, try to go back and, if it's something to do with a verb, maybe try to look it up, in previous chapters, but try to make some sense of it and then repeat that process over and over again until you can read the whole thing, write the story from start to finish, and without needing any help, without writing anything down, and you understand all or pretty close to all of it. That's how you know you're in a good spot and you're ready to move on. Okay, so if you haven't done that yet, pause the video and go do that. Otherwise, we're going to work through the story now. And as long as your translation is pretty close to mine, again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as it's pretty close, you can feel good that you're on the right track. So the story starts like this, okay? You have milites legionarii erant cives Romani incolae Italiae aut provinciarum Romanorum. Okay, so the soldiers of the legion, right? The legionary soldiers, the milites legionarii, right? They were Roman citizens, cives Romani, right? They were Roman citizens, and they're also inhabitants, incolae, right, of Italy. Okay, so it kind of means either inhabitants of Italy, or the out there means or of the Roman provinces, the provinciarum Romanorum. Okay, so they're Roman citizens and they're either from Italy or they're coming from one of the provinces. Okay, then you have equites non erant cives Romani, sed erant milites alieni, qui ex aliis terris venerant. So the cavalry, right, are different. So those are the legionary soldiers. They're the ones who are Roman citizens, right? But it's saying the cavalry, the equites, they were not Roman citizens, so non erant cives Romani, but they were foreign soldiers, milites alieni. Okay. Now, what this is referencing is a lot of times the Roman army, particularly under like Julius Caesar, those Republican armies, they didn't really have cavalry or didn't really have great cavalry. So they get it from the Gauls or the Germans or wherever they can, right? The cavalry tends to be where you put foreign soldiers, right, to help out because they're just better at cavalry than the Romans were, right? The Romans were really good at their infantry fighting, not so much cavalry. So that's what it's referencing here. Okay, and they're milites alieni, right, foreign soldiers who, when errant, had come from aliis terris, from other lands, right? And like I said, they might be Spanish, they might be from Germany. There's a bunch of different places where the Romans had really good horsemen for their armies. Okay. Then you have milites legionarii, equitibus magnitudine corporis non semper erant pares, sed saepe eos virtute superabat. Okay, so the Roman, the legionary soldiers, right? The legionary soldiers, they were not equal or not always equal. So non semper erant pares, right? They were not always equal to the cavalry, right? Equitibus. With respect to magnitudine corporis, the size of their body, right? Their stature is really what it's talking about. So it's saying the legions weren't necessarily the same size as the cavalrymen, right? And this is sort of an odd commentary, but I think it's talking about just the ethnic differences between Italians and people not from Italy. That would be my guess here. But often superabat, right? They surpassed them, eos, with respect to virtue, right? You have the ablative of respect happening here, virtute. Now, again, it's an interesting statement. I wouldn't necessarily say this is true, but again, it's from a textbook from the 1930s, so you kind of take it for what it is. But this is at least what the story has, right? Sort of the difference between the cavalry and the legions. Okay, then you have miles legionarius bene armatus erat, right? So a legionary soldier, singular, one of them, was armed, right? Armatus erat, right? He was armed bene, well, right? He was well armed, which is true. You have in capite Galliam, in corpore loricam, in sinistra manu scutum gerebat. Okay, so he wears gerebat, right? Here he wore on his head in capite, he wore the Galliam, a helmet. In corpore, right, on his body, he wore the lorica. Now, this is the famous lorica segmenta, right? Lorica is really armor, right? Like body armor, basically. What you're seeing in the picture here, which is not necessarily the standard, is the segmented lorica, right? The lorica segmenta, which is those plates of metal in segmented pieces. Other things you'd see might be chainmail, different types of armor, right? It really depends on the time period you're talking about, but they wear body armor is really what you're getting at with lorica. Okay. And in sinistra manu, right, in their left hand, they carried or they wore the scutum, right, the shield, the scutum shield. It's sort of that like tower shield that you see in the image to the right. Okay. So that's sort of typical body armor, helmet, armor, right, body armor, and the shield in your left hand. Okay. Then you have quae arma, ei praesidio erant. Okay. So this armor, right, the quae there, you could even translate as these weapons, right? So these weapons, they were protection, praesidio, for him. Okay, there's your double dative there. So they were protection for him, is what keeps the legionary safe. Okay, in dextra manu gerebat grave pilum quod longissime mitere potera. So in his right hand, in dextra manu, right, in his right hand, he carried or had, right, a grave pilum, a heavy pila. Okay. Now the pilum rather, not pila. A pilum is the spear. We spoke about that, I believe, in the first video for chapter 41, right? But you can see in this image, the pilum is a javelin, right? And it's softer metal, lead, if I remember it. And the idea is you could throw it. They'd carry two. You chuck them at the enemy. Here it says he was able to throw, to send mitere, right? So the quote there means which. It's talking about the pilum. It says which he was able to throw very far, right? Longissime. So we said in the other video, this javelin, when they'd start, right, a battle, when the enemy approached, the legionaries would all throw their pila, right, their individual pilum, at the enemy. And the idea is if you hit the person, you could probably kill him, right, which is the idea. But if you miss, they're probably going to block it with their shield, and the pilum would bend, right? The metal was designed to be bent. So when it goes through the shield and bends, right, on whatever target it hits, now it would stick in the shield. It would be very difficult to get out. So the idea is if you hit the shield, now the enemy has to drop the shield, and you're carrying a second pilum, which you would throw for a second time. And now the enemy doesn't have any shield to block it, right? That's the logic of the pilum, right? And I mentioned this in I think the first video for chapter 41. It's an interesting thing you probably want to look up, right? Roman military gear. It's a cool topic. Feel free to look it up on your own. Okay. Then we continue. You have habebat praeterea gladium qui a dextra latere pendebat. Okay. So he had, again, we're talking about the individual legionary soldier. Right. He had, moreover, praeterea, right? Moreover, he had the gladium, the gladius, right, which is a sword, right? And it's the sword which pendebat, which was hanging by his dextro latere, right, by his side. Okay, so it was hanging by his right side, so he'd have the sword there. So whenever he needs it, he can draw his sword, and now he can fight with the famous gladius of the Roman legion. Okay. Then it continues, and you have ubi hostes proprius, rather, venerant, miles legionaris pilum mitebat. So this is kind of describing what we were just talking about. When an enemy, right, had come closer, when the enemy, or enemies you might even say, had come closer, the miles legionaris, right, the legionary soldier, mitebat pilum, he sent, or threw is really what mitebat means. He sent a pilum, threw a pilum, right? So when they get close, you throw it. Then you have tum in hostes decorebat et cum eis gladio pugnabat. Okay, so then after he threw the pilum, right, he ran down, decorebat, ran into the enemies, right? So he decorebat in hostes. He ran into the enemies and fought with them, cum eis, with his gladius, right? Pugnabat gladio. So again, this is describing exactly what we said before, right? You throw your pilum and then you have your sword ready to go to continue the fight. Okay. Then you have arma equitum erant variorum generum nam equites avariis terris venerant. Okay, so we just talked about the legionary weapons. Now we're talking about the arma equitum, the weapons of the cavalry. Okay, So it says they were variorum generum, right? They were of various types, right? Generum, there's the types. Variorum just means various, and it's genitive plural, right? Of various types. For the equites, the cavalry, they when erant, they had come from various lands, right? Avaris terris. So the idea is whatever ethnic group you get for your cavalry in the Roman army, that's how they're going to fight. So, for example, right? The Spanish cavalry and the cavalry from North Africa was really lightly armed, and they would throw javelins, right? The German cavalry tends to be a little bit heavier armed. So, and they fight in a slightly different style. So it really depends on where they're coming from. That's what the textbook is getting at here, right? It depends on the ethnicity of the cavalry. That's the style that they fight with in terms of their weapons. Okay. Then we have the last paragraph, which goes like this. You have qui sumum imperium exercitus habebat, dux belli appellebator. So he who, the qui there means who, but it really means like he who. So he who had the summum imperium, the highest authority of the army, exercitus there is genitive. Okay, so the man who had the highest authority of the army, appellebator, he was called dux belli, the leader of war, right? The commander, the dux there is the commander, right? The chief, okay? Then you have post eus primam victoriam imperator appellebator. So after his first victory, right? After the primum victoriam, the first victory of him, eus, right? So his first victory, he was called appellebator imperator. He was called, commander, right? This is where you get the word emperor from in English, right? But he's the commander, okay? So you have the leader, and then you get called imperator after you have a victory. Okay, legati erant milites qui singulas legiones ducebat. Okay, so now we have a different sort of group here, the legati, right? The legates, which are really like lieutenants. Okay, so the lieutenants or the legates were soldiers, right? Erant milites. They were soldiers who led, right? Duceban, or were leading, or who led singulas legiones, right? Individual legions. So each group of about 5,000 guys, the legions, they're led by legates. Okay, and then the dux belli, or the imperator, is the overall commander of the entire army. Okay. When you read Caesar, for instance, you have some really famous legates that pop up, like Sabinus and Cotta. Cicero, right, is in there. Titus Labienus is in there. So there's a lot of famous men who served as legates under Julius Caesar. That's an interesting structure you can kind of look up, and it'll give you an idea of how the whole Roman army usually went, right? No matter when the time was. This is basically the same structure every time. Then you have ei legati erant nobiles magnae virtutis. So these legates, or these lieutenants, were nobles, right? So they were upper class of great virtue, right? They were nobles of great virtue, magnae virtutis. Okay. Then you have fortissimi autem militum omnium erant centuriones. So the bravest, however, right, moreover, the bravest of all soldiers, right, so militum omnium, the bravest of all soldiers were the centurions, centuriones, okay, the centurions. So these are the leaders of 100 men, right, the famous Roman centurions, which you're really seeing in the picture here. Right, so they were, right, erant, these centurions, right, erant belli peritissimi et multos impetus in hostes fecerat. So they were peritissimi, they were very skilled, or the most experienced, you might say, of war, belli, and they had made, fecerat, they had made many attacks, multos impetus, right, many attacks into the enemy, in hostes. So these men were very battle-hardened and experienced soldiers. They get promoted to be the leaders. They're called centurions, right, and they kind of run the smaller formations. So the Roman army really is a hierarchy, and I'd encourage you to take a look at it. There's a lot of good videos out there that show you how it works. But you have sort of the 100 men led by a centurion. All the centuries are really what forms the legion. You have a legate in control of that, and all the different legions answer to the imperator, or the dux, right? The sort of overall commander of the army.